Well, good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. I am Brian Ritter. I am the Executive Director for the Mercury Chamber Orchestra, and I am absolutely thrilled to be joined on stage by Clara Faircloth, who, along with Antoine Plant, is the co-creator, but Tara is the director of Loving Clara Schumann, which we're going to experience together this evening. So over the next 30 minutes or so, I'm going to pepper Tara with a bunch of questions about what we'll be experiencing to give you a little bit of insight into what Loving Clara is all about. As many of you know, Mercury for the last decade or so has been experimenting with the concert experience. And so about once a season or so, moving beyond just a traditional way of presenting music with the musicians, Antoine and the musicians standing on stage, the bright lights, and an electric musical performance, we've experimented by adding lots of other fun stuff in the mix. And it was actually Loving Clara Schumann, which was one of our early experiments in doing some of this work. And it was exactly 7 years ago that we premiered this production. We'll talk a little bit more about that in a second. But before we get into that, I want to just ask Tara to talk a little bit about what a stage director, this sounds to me like one of the most exciting jobs ever. And she has really been all over the country, all over the world, working with opera companies, working with music organizations, doing what she does. And so I guess if you could just start off talking in general about what stage directing is all about and why you love it so much.
Wow. Okay. Well, I've been a director for quite a while now. I actually started my work as a singer, and I shortly realized that I did not like getting bossed around, but I did like bossing people around, as my boyfriend can attest. So I made the change to directing, and actually when I first got interested in this field, Antoine was one of the first people I reached out to, because as a singer I didn't know a whole lot about how backstage worked, and so this was when Mercury was very, very young, and I said, I'll change light gels, I'll do whatever you need, just let me be backstage and learn from people that are much smarter than me. So anyway, so I feel like I owe a real debt of gratitude to Mercury for that. But so an opera director, which is almost all of my work is in opera these days, I really just correlate it to being a film director. So I spend, just like you might imagine, if you think of a film director, you know, like talking to the actors, telling them where to go, what do they feel, what's the concept, and things like that. I certainly do spend a lot of time doing that, and that is really, in a way, the most fun part of the job in some ways. But also, there is a whole lot of work that happens before we get to the rehearsal room. And in the best of circumstances, like I feel Clara was, I'm working with creative teams, usually a set, costume, and lighting designer, and in this case, also a choreographer and a conductor, who Antoine did the arrangements for many of these pieces, and also helped me make some selections about some of the instrumental pieces. And so you're working upwards 2-3 years in advance. In opera, usually it works that they say, hey, Tara, we want to do a rake's progress. Take it away. So we hire a team, and then we're spending our time developing a concept and figuring out the story that we want to tell with a set piece of music. So I'm very much like a creative brainstormer, and then I spend a lot of time as a project manager trying to get everything lined up, and then I spend time in the rehearsal room working with singers and other performers, and then we move into the theater where we're working more closely with technicians. It truly does take a village to make anything artistic, and so yeah, it's really fun to get to know all kinds of different people, from the electricians that are plugging things in and taping stuff to the floor to the most highbrow. There's like there's a million places where a show can fall down, and every single person has such an important part to bring to it.
As I mentioned, we premiered Loving Clara 7 years ago. And if you go back and do the math on that, all of you may remember that that was the season of Hurricane Harvey. And so Antoine and Tara had assembled an amazing creative team that had built this production for this stage. But because of Harvey, and actually I think the floodwaters came in, breached the building just through those doors, and the basement of this facility totally filled up, and for about a year and a half, the Wortham Center was shut down. And within days of that occurrence, we were looking for another venue, and so Tara and this amazing production team had to kind of, in many ways, reimagine this production, and it premiered over just down the street at the Hobby Center in Zilka Hall. But we're thrilled to bring it back to where we originally intended to do this production. And so I wanted to ask you about that. Maybe not so much specifically about bringing it to this stage, but just in general, what it is like to premiere a piece and then many years later remount it. What's that like?
Oh, yeah. Well, it's really interesting. This piece is unlike any other show that I've ever really put together because it is not an opera, but it is full of song and dance and video installation, solo piano, chamber music. There are so many components. And so when Antoine said, hey, we would love to do Loving Clara again, we loved it so much the first time, but we'd like to do it in this more larger venue and an expanded thought about it. I mean, I was just delighted. I'll be honest, just the opportunity to work on this beautiful music again has been such a joy for me. The leader in this piece are some of the most often performed leader, but in America, we don't really see a lot of art song performed unless you're associated with a university. And of course, in Houston, we have several top-notch universities and lots of opportunity to see amazing art song performance. And very often, these songs are performed by students, which are great. And I love students, but what a privilege to work with mature, talented artists, really at the peak of their talent, both physically in their vocalism and also in their dramatic interpretation and their development as human beings and ability to offer a mature reading of these pieces. So number one, I was just super delighted. And then it was just, I hate to be corny, but it was just a joy to open up the pieces, think about what they mean. 7 years later, I'm also a different person, and just examining the story and what it could mean to us today in a world where we are craving beauty and connection. I just think it's the most perfect piece for right now.
Before we get too far down the path, I thought it might be good to ask you a little bit about the title character, if you will. But really, this production involves her relationships as well with two other very famous composers, Robert Schumann and Johannes Brahms. Could you, not so much in the context of the production, because we'll get to that in a second, but just historically, who was Clara, who was Robert, who was Johannes, and how did they all kind of come together?
Well, Clara Schumann was just such an incredible person. So she was alive in the mid-1800s. She lived a nice long life, I think 76 years. She was a child prodigy. She gave her first public concert at 9 years old, I believe. She was a pianist, and she proceeded to perform in over 1,300 concerts over the course of her 61-year career. And she was, in that time, so Romantic era, this was a time when the idea of artist as superstar was really taking off. And so she was an early superstar. Just like the young people are going to Taylor Swift now, or whatever. People would clamor for tickets. They would want autographs. They would follow her and see her on tour in different cities. So she was a superstar. She was, yes, married to Robert Schumann, who was also a composer and a conductor. And they had a vivid love affair. He was a student of her father. Her father was a piano teacher, and he met her when she was very young, and they fell in love. And yes, I believe they started sparking around when she was around 16. And he was, I think, 9 or 10 years older than she was. And so they have a very famous love affair. It was very contentious with her father, yada, yada, yada. And they had 10 children. They lost 2 of them. So, superstar pianist, 8 children at home, and also Robert had mental illness. He struggled with mental illness, and that began to present itself very early in their marriage. And he had schizophrenia, manic depression. I mean, I don't know, they had different terms in that time, but he tried to kill himself, and he was in an insane asylum for the last part of his life. So she also was a wife dealing with that issue. She also was a wonderful proponent for young performers. And one of those young performers and musicians who came to their house to meet them and ask for an introduction into German society was the young Johannes Brahms. And I believe he was 22, 23 when they met him. And she said, "I believe he is a gift from God." And the moment that Johannes Brahms, a very famous composer, now we know of him, he's in the top 10 of German composers, probably higher than that. He's on symphony concerts all the time. He wrote beautiful songs and piano works. And as soon as Brahms met Robert and Clara, they really took him into their family almost immediately. And they but they introduced him into society, and it was really because of their promotion that he became as well recognized and famous as he is. And they also developed a very intimate friendship. Both Robert and Clara felt a strong connection with Johannes Brahms. And so when Robert became very ill and went into the insane asylum, in fact, he did not see Clara for like 3 years. The only person he would receive was Johannes Brahms. And he really asked Brahms to really take over the household and be the support that Clara needed. So that's the second important man. There is also a brief appearance in our show of Clara's father, Friedrich Wieck, who was, as I said, a famous piano teacher, Clara's instructor, and also Robert's instructor, until there was a lawsuit to marry his daughter that didn't go too well.
I want to ask you a little bit more about the music itself. Absolutely wall-to-wall gorgeous music. And what Antoine and Tara have done here is really quite special, and I know all of you will enjoy it immensely. But I want to ask you 2 specific things about some of the selections. First off, you choose to begin with music by Johannes Brahms. And one of my favorite descriptions, sort of paraphrasing of his music, is there's plenty of sunny moments, but the storm clouds are never far away in much of his music. But you choose to begin with a solo piano work of his, Intermezzo, Opus 118. Could you tell us a little bit about that particular piece and why it's so special, why it's so significant?
I love 118. I have always loved it. It is a beautiful piano solo, and I chose this piece to open our show specifically because Brahms wrote it for Clara when she was getting quite old. She toured for most of her life, and she was getting older and having arthritis in her hands. And he wrote this little set of pieces for her. This actually totally chokes me up. because she couldn't play as well as she did before. And so they are actually slightly easier. I mean, I could never dream of playing these pieces, but they're a little more gentle on the hands. And I just feel like you can feel the love that he felt for her in every bar. So I love that little piece of history. I actually think of the beginning of our show as really Clara as an old woman, kind of. I think the whole show is really her thinking about her life and grappling with where she's come. And, so I love that history, but also it is just one of the most beautiful pieces of music that there is. And I really love in our show, I hope you guys feel this way as well, that it starts almost like a piano recital, and the Opus 118 begins, and nothing's going to happen for just a few minutes except us listening to that piece. And I hope you'll take that opportunity to take a deep breath and just relax into the musical experience that you're going to have tonight.
Antoine and Tara have picked other chamber music of these three composers to fill out the rest of the program. You've also touched on this a little bit a few moments ago, but I wonder if you could talk a little bit more. They're kind of providing the narrative foundation is all of this gorgeous lieder or art song. And all three of these composers, I think, wrote hundreds of songs. And it just seems like this is a significant thing of perhaps the 19th century. Maybe if you could touch on kind of what was going on, why were they writing so many songs? How did they experience these? What was happening in music society that was so different?
Well, at this time, it was just after the Industrial Revolution, and it was kind of the rise of the middle class. In the classical era, a lot of music was performed either in church or in noble people's houses. And this is in Germany. And so for the first time, there was a whole class of people that actually had some spare time on their hands and some spare money, a little bit of money. And so it was the rise of the salon, like home music making. Also, as I mentioned before, like the traveling superstars were really becoming a thing, but also people made music in their home, and they were looking for things to do. They didn't have their iPhones or television or movies or anything. And so music became very, very important. There was also a big flush of poetry being written in this time, and people read a lot of poetry. And so this push to create these small pieces of music on popular poems of the day and sell them for people to play on the piano or in their own homes, or give them as gifts to one another. You know, like I said, Brahms wrote 118 for Clara specifically, and several of the songs in our show were written during the first year of Robert and Clara's marriage. They, together, as a wedding gift to one another, chose a set of poems, and they each set every other poem as a gift for one another, as a little project, and they gave that to each other as a wedding gift. I mean, how lovely is that? So it was extremely rich material for us to dive into when we decided to create this story. It's certainly a fictionalized understanding of their life. It's based on facts, and it's based on lots of readings. If you ever want to get nosy, there's lots of diaries and letters and things that you can read that they wrote to one another, the ones that weren't burned. But I honestly just feel like, you know, whether facts are less important than the feelings that they put into their music, and that was really valued at that time, and it's all on the page and it's all on the ear, and I hope you'll hear it too.
I want to ask you now about the production itself and really how these characters are depicted. You've described this as a memory play, I think, almost like a dream sequence, really. But what the choices you've made in the dramatic nature of this production and kind of the stagecraft, I guess, if you will, is really exciting. And I wonder if you could take us through that, of how these composers will come to life for us.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
Well, as I mentioned, I just think Clara is such an interesting, dynamic, multifaceted woman. And when I was thinking like, oh, we're making a show, I guess she'll be a pianist, but while I think the music speaks volumes for her, it really seemed heartbreaking that she wouldn't have a literal voice on the stage. So I thought, wow, what if Clara was a pianist and a singer and also a dancer? Because it was very important to me that we include modern ballet dance in this piece, which I think is just heartbreaking, beautiful. So Clara is portrayed by 3 performers, and they are actually on stage together pretty often. And so then I kind of felt the same way about the other men, or the other people in her life, which in this case are all the men that loved her. Her father, Robert, and Johannes Brahms. So all of the men in her life are portrayed by 1 male singer and 1 male dancer, and they switch off. So I'm glad you're here, because you might not catch on to this immediately, but Robert is always wearing a green scarf, and Johannes Brahms is always wearing a yellow scarf. So if you see the singer take off his green scarf and give it to the dancer, that means that he was Robert in the last scene, and the dancer is Robert in the next scene. Hopefully it becomes clear. Also, another little visual cue you can look for is there's a video installation, very beautifully done by Ben Doyle. And so Clara has a symbol. Her symbol is the rose. Robert's symbol is a tree, a green leafy tree, until he begins to feel ill. And Johannes Brahms' symbol is the sun, a bright golden sun. He was blonde, he had curly blonde hair, and was extremely attractive. And so I just kind of chose those. I felt that Robert had this, I don't know, earthy, beautiful quality, and Brahms feels more ethereal. And anyway, so you can look for those as well as a little clue in the video installation.
I wonder if, kind of bringing this together, we started off talking a little bit about you as a director, but kind of kind of bringing this to a close and talking about this creative team that has been such an amazing to watch this last week or two, putting all this together along with you. But maybe touching on the process of that, but kind of what each of those kind of areas of the production are.
Oh, sure. So the piece came together. I was working on staff at Des Moines Metro Opera. It was a very hot summer, and I had a lot of free time, thank heavens. And so I listened to all of the music of all of these composers, and I thought about what story we wanted to tell, and then I started making a list, and I would email Antoine, and I would say, what do you think about this? And Antoine would say, oh, I think we cannot forget this piece, and so it was a negotiation. And I said Antoine was really good about, he has much more prolific knowledge about the instrumental pieces than I did. And so he made suggestions about that, and we had a negotiation for some time. Then we brought in our choreographer and our video installation, Marlena and Ben Doyle. They are married to each other, luckily for us. And so it's interesting. I've worked with quite a few choreographers in my life, and my experience with Marlena was fun. I went through every piece and manically, some would say as a control freak, went through and said, this is the story I want to tell. And even down to this 30 minutes feels like this, And then when we met in the rehearsal room with Marlena and the dancers, most of that just went out the window immediately, which is totally fine. that's how it's supposed to work. You have to have an idea and then throw away your babies, as we say in theater, murder your babies. But so, you know, it was really, that's actually where the fun is, working with the dancers and listening to the music and what does this mean and creating something. And it's so great for me as an opera director to have these incredible, again, wildly amazing professional dancers, and you know, you make a small suggestion and then they just take it and make it ridiculously beautiful. And Marlena would say, "Oh yes," and that, like, this is how we translate that. And it was very similar working with Ben, because I was, you know, I would say, here's these large motifs that I want to explore with these characters, and you know, this section is about his impending mental illness and how is that destroying their lives, and also make it about trees. And so then Ben would come up with some visual language and we would look at it together and talk about timing and make a million little adjustments. So, you know, it was pretty painstaking, and creating something out of nothing, well, not even out of nothing, creating something out of already established masterpieces is, it's a challenge, but it's wonderful. And then in the theater, working with the lighting designer is a whole other ball of wax. And, you know, I just think a good lighting designer is like a freaking magician. I don't understand how it works, but they have so much information and thought, and then they're building light in air. And an amazing lighting designer, you might not even notice how beautiful it is. But if you have a bad lighting designer, you definitely do. But I actually think that the lighting is both beautiful and noticeable in this piece. So I hope that you will notice it. It's really gorgeous.
Well, I think that's a good place to end. Thank you, Tara, for this amazing experience we're about to have, your passion and your love for all of this amazing music, and bringing it to life and imagining it at the very start. So we can't wait to share it with all of you. I will point out, if you joined us a little bit late, I point out in your program books, page 9 is a really great place to start. We'll give you a wonderful synopsis of the experience of loving Clara Schumann, so check that out. I also want to acknowledge the National Endowment for the Arts, who provided a very generous grant for the premiere of this piece 7 years ago. And also want to acknowledge Lloyd Kirchner, who has made a very special sponsorship gift to support this evening's concert, and so we're very grateful to him as well. So thank you, each of you, for being here, coming early to hear a little bit more insights about this production. We know you're going to enjoy your time here tonight, and very much enjoy the performance. Thank you so much.
Thank you.